This video will explain an artist's theory on the physics of time as a physical process. By doing this, it will give us an understanding of quantum mechanics that is based on an objective reality of everyday life. This is done by explaining time as an emergent property, with the future coming into existence light photon by light photon, within an infinite number of reference frames that are continuously coming in and out of existence. Each individual observer will be in the center of their own reference frame, interacting with the wave-particle duality of light relative to their energy and momentum, or in other words, their actions. In this theory, we have an observer or conscious created reality only in the sense that the observer can make the conscious choice of how to interact with the wave-particle duality of light. Because light is an electromagnetic wave, the electron also has wave-particle duality, with the flow of electric charge linked to what we see and feel as the flow of time. This is formed by one universal process of continuous energy exchange, with the moment of now being formed by photon-electron couplings, with a past that is gone forever and a future that is always uncertain and only exists as a probability wave that at the smallest scale is represented by Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. This can seem totally insane, but I believe that it can be explained in a totally logical, intuitive way without having to use abstract mathematics. This can be done if we think of the universe as a continuum, continuously expanding as an inverse sphere. The reason why it is an inverse sphere is because we are within the universe, looking out, being able to look back in time in every direction at the beauty of the stars. We have a process of continuous energy exchange that is formed by the spontaneous absorption and emission of light. This is represented in quantum mechanics by the quantum wave-particle function expanding out as an inverse sphere. In this theory, this forms part of one universal process with the inverse square law of Newton's gravity. The wave-particle duality of light is acting like the bits or zeros and ones of a computer, forming a blank canvas that we can interact with, turning the possible into the actual within our own reference frame. Time is an emergent property formed by a process of spherical symmetry forming and breaking that we see and feel as the future continuously coming into existence, light photon by light photon, relative to the position and the energy and momentum of the atoms. The extra dimensions of string theory and the parallel universes of Hugh Everett's many worlds interpretation are just future possibilities and opportunities in our one three-dimensional universe of continuous energy exchange, or what I like to call continuous creation. In the mathematics of Hugh Everett's many worlds interpretation, the parallel universes are all at right angles to each other. In this theory, this is because the electric and magnetic fields are always at right angles to each other, forming part of a process of continuous change that we see and feel as the continuum of time itself. The mathematics of this theory is easy to follow because it represents the geometry and the ratios of a dynamic process in three-dimensional space. I will start with this diagram representing the flow of time. In the top left-hand corner, we have the equation known as Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, with 4 pi representing a sphere. We have 4 pi in this equation because the uncertainty principle is formed by the quantum wave-particle function or probability function of quantum mechanics that expands out as an inverse sphere. It would be logical if time was formed by this process that represents the spontaneous absorption and emission of light, that time would expand out in every direction in three-dimensional space with the expansion of the universe. But this is not what we observe. time is two-dimensional, with a past and future, and a timeline forming an arrow of time that modern physics cannot explain. Almost everywhere else in this diagram we see 2 pi. The reason for this is that equations with 2 pi have cylindrical symmetry, a form of line symmetry. This line symmetry is formed because when light comes in contact with matter, it forms a photon-electron coupling, and we have matter-antimatter annihilation in just one direction, forming the arrow of time in that reference frame. In the lower right-hand corner of the diagram, we have the Planck constant, h over 2 pi, representing a constant of action in the dynamic process that forms the arrow of time. Also, we see Heisenberg's uncertainty principle reformulated with energy and time, with 2 pi representing the timeline, instead of 4 pi representing three-dimensional space. Note also that the oscillating wave represents harmonic motion, and that the equation representing the movement of the pendulum is typical of equations representing the movement of objects, with 2 pi representing a universal process of spherical symmetry forming and breaking that we see and feel as the flow of time. This diagram shows a complex plane with the positive and negative numbers and the imaginary numbers going off at right angles, with 0 in the center. This still represents the geometry of a physical process. The 0 represents 0 time, or t equals 0, the moment of now, formed by light interacting with matter, with the positive numbers marching off, forming a potential future with a square of probability, and the negative numbers receding towards a limitless past, representing the positive and negative of electromagnetic waves. In the top left-hand corner, we have Maxwell's second law, with north and south magnetic poles cancelling out, equaling 0, within a sphere of uncertainty. This forms the continuous flow of electric charge, with the movement of electromagnetic fields. The electric fields will always be at right angles to the magnetic fields, because the momentum of light will always be at right angles to the surface of the sphere. This is represented on the diagram by the imaginary numbers being at right angles to the real numbers. In Maxwell's theory of magnetic fields, any moving charged particle creates a magnetic moment. Because positive and negative charge is an innate part of matter that keeps cancelling out, this process is universal and continuous, forming a continuum of time, moment by moment. On the lower left-hand side of the diagram, we have Dirac's equation that also equals 0, representing 0 time, with matter-antimatter annihilation, forming the magnetic moment or dipole moment, with the future coming into existence, photon by photon, quanta by quanta. This magnetic moment is formed when light waves interact with matter to form a photon-electron coupling, and the electron is the most spherical object in the universe. This spherical symmetry, or organization, forms the low entropy that creates a possibility for the continuous increase in entropy, or disorganization, that we have in the second law of thermodynamics as time unfolds. As photon energy cascades down, it forms greater degrees of freedom for the increase in entropy or disorganization, forming the uncertainty of everyday life. In the top right-hand corner of this diagram, we have Euler's identity, the most beautiful equation to come out of the mind of man. But this beautiful equation has no meaning or purpose in modern physics. But in this theory, Euler's identity is interwoven into the dynamic fabric of our universe, with the +1 representing 1 quanta, or photon, equals 0 time, t equals 0, the moment of now. To understand this further, we have to use the next diagram that shows how this spherical symmetry breaks, forming spiral symmetry that has line symmetry for the arrow of time. When the spherical symmetry is broken, it forms spiral symmetry in the form of the Riemann surface rising up out of the complex plane, forming a spiral pattern. Euler's identity is at the heart of this process. The easiest way of looking at this is that the only number you could add to the number 1 to get 0 is -1, and this forms a rotation that breaks the spherical symmetry. Also, in mathematics, the imaginary number I is the square root of -1. There is no objective understanding to this. You could say that this is just the way mathematics is. But in this theory, the imaginary number I is the square root of -1 because it is part of a physical process linked to the square of probability. There will always be uncertainty at the quantum level and in our everyday life, because the imaginary number I is the square root of -1, representing the rotational symmetry that maintains the probability function at t equals 0, the moment of now. It may seem at times that the theory is explaining the paradoxes of mathematics rather than the mathematics explaining the theory. This is because human mathematics is based on the dynamic geometry of this theory. This can be seen in the way Euler's identity and imaginary numbers are part of the theory. At each rotation of the origin, 2π, cylindrical symmetry has to be added, and we find ourselves on another sheet of the complex plane. This spiral symmetry forms line symmetry, representing the timeline, or arrow of time. The entire spiral pattern is equivalent to a sphere 4π with a single minimum dynamic origin formed by spherical symmetry. When the spherical symmetry is broken, it forms the imperfect spiral symmetry of life that is visible in nature. This is because if the quantum wave particle function or probability function is reformulated as a linear vector, then all the information I can find says that each new vector is formed by adding the two previous vectors together. This forms the Fibonacci sequence. In this theory, we have the Fibonacci numbers in nature, not because of economy of growth or space, but because time and space is being formed by the geometry and therefore the mathematics of this dynamic process. As can be seen on the diagram, we already have 0, representing the moment of now, time equals 0, with +1 and -1 representing the positive and negative of electromagnetic waves. Therefore, we even have the start of the Fibonacci sequence in the diagram. This is linked to Euler's identity, giving this beautiful equation a place in the structure of space and time. To explain how the probabilistic nature of quantum mechanics can represent the potential possibilities and opportunities of everyday life, we have to use the mathematics of the electromagnetic force that is based on the work of Michael Faraday. Because the light photon of quantum mechanics is also the carrier of the electromagnetic force, this can be seen as one universal physical process. In this diagram, instead of having 0 in the center of the diagram representing time equals 0, we have Q representing charge. Instead of having a number line representing the future, we have a test charge represented by a little q. The future is represented by potential energy in the form of voltage acting on a charge to move the charge from one point to another point. The voltage is the work done to bring a test charge, little q, from infinity all the way into a point that is a distance r away from the main charge q. This gives us a totally objective understanding to electromagnetism. We have to do work by putting energy into something to create the potential of our own future. Because this is a universal process, it must be the same for all electrical activity. Therefore, electrical activity in the brain can be seen as the most advanced part of this universal process. Therefore, conscious thought is always in the moment of now, with a continuous stream of thoughts and ideas that can comprehend this process as time, as an interactive process of continuous creation with a potential future infinity of possibilities. By dumbing down consciousness to the level of electrical activity that is aware of its own electrical potential, we can place the individual observer in the center of his or her own reference frame as an active participant in the dynamics of our universe. Life will create its own ripples in the fabric of space-time as part of one universal process. This is true for the smallest creature as it is for the largest planet. Therefore, Newton's universal law of gravity is part of this process. In this theory, Newton's apple does not fall to the ground because of the downward force of gravity, but because of the upward momentum of electromagnetic radiation or light. Gravity is not a real force at all. It is a secondary force to the electromagnetic force. Objects just freefall towards the greatest energy because it has the slowest rate of time, or the greatest time dilation. I believe this can be seen in the mathematics, with both the gravitational force and the electromagnetic force having the inverse square law. We have the inverse square law because the surface area of the light sphere increases with the square of the radius. Thus the strength of the gravitational field is inversely proportional to the square of the distance from the source. There is no mysterious action at a distance. The gravitational field will work at the speed of light because it is an integral part of one universal process with the electromagnetic force. We have one universal process that begins with the quantum wave-particle function or probability function of quantum mechanics, expanding out as an inverse sphere, and ends with the inverse square law of gravity and Newton's third law of motion. To every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. Gravity is the opposite reaction to the atoms radiating quantized spherical wavefronts of electromagnetic radiation. So far in this video, this theory has been explained using the mathematics that we already have. Now we are going to look at the one new equation this theory is based upon. In this diagram, the Lorentz contraction of space and time is between the energy and mass. The greater the energy, the greater the time dilation, and the slower time will run. Mass will increase relative to this, and each reference frame can be seen as a vortex in space, formed by the rate that time flows. The C2 is light radiating out in all directions, forming a sphere of probability. It is a probability wave of a potential future event, and during the act of measurement, the magnitude squared, or C2, gives a probability for different potential future outcomes. The brackets represent the dynamic boundary condition of the reference frame. This is formed by the surface area of the sphere that forms a two-dimensional boundary condition. The infinity symbol represents the whole universe as an infinite number of dynamic reference frames that are continuously interacting, forming the uncertainty of everyday life. The universe is expanding in space and time, forming what Einstein called space-time. In this theory, this expansion can be seen not just as galaxies expanding away from each other, but also as future possibilities and opportunities relative to each individual. An observer can never get to the edge of the universe because it is creating its own space-time relative to its energy. It makes no difference what galaxy you observe from, because time and space are interlinked. The greater the time dilation, the greater the length contraction of space. In this way, an infinite universe fits within a finite sphere, as long as the sphere is expanding continuously in space and time as an infinity of possibilities that can be represented mathematically as the square root of the continuous irrational number pi. This is because human mathematics in the beginning was based on the geometry of shapes that never change, like squares, triangles and circles. But the geometry of the universe is not static, like this. Therefore we have the irrational numbers, like pi, dropping out of our mathematics as a never-ending infinite series of numbers representing the infinite nature of our universe. This theory can explain the paradoxes of mathematical infinity. These infinities are formed because we have a process of continuous creation that we see and feel as time, that has the geometry of space-time. A mathematician will interact with this universal process just like any other object, continuously forming his or her own space-time geometry. Therefore it is only logical that he or she will be able to divide that geometry into an infinite number of smaller parts as time unfolds. The universe is an interactive, dynamic, expanding continuum, and therefore we have the infinities of human mathematics. We are all active participants in the dynamics of our universe. Within such a theory, because the laws of physics are based on one universal process, the universe always seems to be fine-tuned, or in perfect balance. It can never expand into nothingness, or undergo a big crunch, collapsing in on itself, because gravity is a secondary force to the electromagnetic force. And therefore everything is connected by one universal process that forms the laws of physics. Even an individual rose will form its own future within the geometry and symmetry of this process. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and rate. It will help the promotion of this theory.